I felt fear for the first time fighting. With humans, the first thing I noticed about humans was how soft they were. Not soft like something gentle, soft. Like something that should not have survived long enough to build starships. I was standing in the briefing room of a Joint Command vessel, 14 species, gathered around a tactical display, all of us assigned to the same ice moon, all of us about to walk into the same kind of trouble. The humans stood in their thin suits, looking like they had been assembled by someone who ran out of materials halfway through and decided confidence would cover the gap. No exoskeleton, no redundant organs, a circulatory system so exposed to atmospheric pressure variation that a single suit failure could end one of them in under 3 minutes. Their bones were calcium, the Vale-Cath use calcium-based compounds in our architecture for walls, not for beings who go to war. And yet here they were. I had fought alongside 47 known species. In 31 campaigns, I maintained my own taxonomy, updated, cross-referenced. Accurate, the Thune were excellent at sustained pressure combat but brittle. Under flank exposure, the Mexari moved fast and process slow. The Garrow had no self-preservation instinct but superb formation memory. Humans were Tier 4, support category. Useful the way a secondary weapons platform is useful, good to have in position, not something you build a strategy around. I filed them there and felt organized about it. Then their commander walked in. She was shorter than my primary weapon. She came through the door eating something from a silver foil packet that smelled like compressed salt, walking and reading something on a small hand device and chewing all at once like she had been given too much coordination as a child and never found a use for all of it. She did not look at any of us. When she entered, she looked at the tactical display. Sergeant Priya Davar. The translator gave me her rank, her service file followed, 11 engagements, 6 commendations, 3 official reprimands for what human military records classified as insubordination, and what I would much later come to understand was just her natural operating frequency. She studied the display for 4 seconds. Then she looked at Sekit Val, a senior Volkith commander, veteran of 40 campaigns, a being who has the kind of presence that tends to make arguments stop themselves before they start. Way deep cold makes rivers stop, and she disagreed with his proposed Eastern positioning out loud in the briefing room in front of 14 species. Sekit Val looked at her. She looked back. She was still holding the silver packet. She adjusted the display herself, overlaid a new approach vector, and explained why in 4 sentences. He incorporated her adjustment. I stood very still and processed what had just happened. Davar moved on without acknowledgement, finished the last of whatever was in the packet and went back to her device. Winning an argument with a Volkith general appeared to be something that simply happened to her on certain days, and was not worth noting. I added a secondary notation to her file: anomalous social aggression. Patterns will observe further. The briefing went on. The Korath swarm had nested a collapse formation on Yevith 4, an ice moon on the outer rim of a system that neither side particularly valued except for the relay station buried under its southern glacier. The station serviced 17 different communication networks. We needed it functional. The Korra had claimed it We were going to go take it back. Straightforward as these things go. I studied the other humans while Davar finished presenting her unit's approach. Vector, there were 12 of them. Owen Price was tall in the way that looks like an accident, like he started growing at age 14 and past his intended height, and nobody stopped him. He kept rotating a small metal ring between his fingers throughout the briefing, not from distraction. Something with a function I could not identify. Clara Webb stood with her eyes closed for portions of the briefing, breathing at a slow, controlled rate. I respected the discipline of it. She was preparing herself in some interior way, drawing something inward and settling it. I understood that kind of preparation. Felix Holt was 22. The file said so, 22. Human years is almost not time at all. He had the face of someone who had not yet accumulated enough damage to look like a soldier, though he was standing in formation like one. He kept orienting toward Davar the way compass needle orients toward magnetic north, automatic, unaware it was happening. Lena Shaw stood to the back of the group. Near the wall panel, she was watching the display with an expression I had no translation for. Not focus, not calculation, something that sat between those two things and belonged to neither. Nina Cross, the unit's communication specialist, had a small data pad in her left hand that she was cross-referencing with the main display in real time. She caught 3 errors in the Korath formation data that the senior analyst had missed. She corrected them without announcing that she was doing so. I cataloged all of it. There was one moment near the end of the briefing that I did not catalog. I was observing the humans, specifically studying how they distributed their weight during standing formation, which differs from Volketh posture in ways that have tactical implications, and Lena Shaw caught me watching. She smiled. Not a dominance display. I know every dominance display in the documented taxonomy of 47 species. This was not any of them. It was directed at me without any tactical or communicative function that I could identify. Just the bilateral rearrangement of surface muscle that humans do with their faces when and here the translator gave me 6 possible interpretations, and I dismissed all 6 as insufficient. I looked away. When I looked back, she had already turned to speak to Owen Price about something that made him exhale through his nose in a short burst, which the translator identified as a mild amusement response. The uncatalogued thing sat in my processing for a moment, then I filed it under pending and closed the briefing record. We had 6 hours before deployment to Yeveth 4, and I needed to run probability matrices on the eastern perimeter approach, the one Davar had adjusted, the one that was now our actual plan. I left the briefing room. In 31 campaigns, I had never once wished I was assigned differently. It did not occur to me to wish it now. The Volketh do not flinch from fragile things. I told myself that with the full weight of 200 years behind it. I believed it without any reservation at all. That I would later understand was the last clean belief I ever had. The ice on Yeveth 4 was the color of a held breath. That is not a Valketh description. The Valketh do not describe landscapes in emotional terms. I am nodding it now, because I did not think it then, and the difference matters. When I stepped off the transport, the surface readings came through my sensors. In precise numerical form, temperature, -61. Surface albedo, 91%. Wind velocity, 42 km per hour from the northern shelf. Structural integrity of the glacier overhead adequate for 2 standard combat rotations. Numbers clean, manageable. The Cora had embedded along the eastern wall of the relay station in a layered defensive arrangement that was, I want to be precise here, competent. Not inspired, competent. They held the high ground, controlled the 2 primary access corridors, and had thermal denial systems positioned to suppress approach from the south and west. Davar had predicted the thermal denial placement in the briefing. She had adjusted our approach to account for it. That was why we were coming from the north through the longer route across open glacier. I noted this again, filed it, kept walking. Hour 1 was textbook. The Val Keth Advance Unit, which I was part of alongside 2nd Val and 4 others, moved through the northern approach at the calculated pace. Measured, efficient, we engaged the outer Cora positions with the kind of clean precision that 31 campaigns produces. Every movement had a purpose. Every expenditure of energy had a return value. We did not rush. We did not stall. We simply proceeded at the rate the mathematics recommended. The humans were on our left flank. I was aware of them in the way I am aware of weather systems or tectonic data, present, relevant to overall planning, not something I watch closely in real time. The first 2 hours had a rhythm. The rhythm ended at hour 3. The Korath second formation, which our intelligence had placed on the southern shelf, was not on the southern shelf. It came from below, through a subglacial passage that our thermal scans had classified as structurally unsuitable for transit. The Korath had apparently not received that classification. They came up through 3 separate bore points and split our formation before anyone had completed the threat assessment. 2nd Val's unit took contact from the east. 2 of our secondary units lost their position. Anchors inside 40 seconds. The relay station approach collapsed into something that no longer had a clean mathematical description. That was when I started watching the humans. Not by choice, by necessity. They were suddenly the closest combat element, and I needed to know their behavior patterns under unplanned contact so I could account for them in my own positioning. What I observed did not fit the taxonomy. Owen Price took a hit to his right shoulder within the first 60 seconds of the new engagement. Not a disabling wound, but a real one. He went down to one knee, stayed there for 2 seconds, and stood back up. He did not retreat. He did not seek cover. He moved forward toward the source of the contact and repositioned to draw fire away from Felix Holt, who had a cleaner shot angle. He did this without being ordered. I felt it odd, possibly species-specific wound response. Will note, Clara Webb, the medic, moved through the open space between our position and the blown cover point to reach a Volkith soldier who had taken a leg injury. Open ground, active Korath fire across that corridor. She ran it in full view of 3 enemy positions without cover. Reached our soldier, assessed the wound, applied a compression field, and began moving them back. She was shot at 7 times. She was not hit. I do not know if that is skill or something else. I have been unable to classify it in the month since. But those two observations were not what changed something in me. It was Seekt Val. He had been with me for 60 years. We had fought in 16 campaigns together. I knew his positioning instincts the way I know the weight of my own weapons. He was the most reliable element in any formation I had ever stood in. The Korath caught him with a second-tier collapse charge at hour 4, the kind that does not leave much. He was there, and then he was not there. And the space where he had been was just cold Yavetha air and ice vapor. I processed it in the Volkith way. Catalogued grief deferred, not suppressed deferred, scheduled for after, when there is time and quiet and the proper ritual. We have a word for it. The word means to place something precious in a sealed room and trust that the room will hold it until you can return. I sealed the room. I kept moving. That is what we do. That is what the discipline is for. The Veil Cath have survived 3 extinction-level wars because we do not let loss become a variable during the engagement. Loss is real. Loss is acknowledged. Loss is simply not permitted to interfere with the mathematics of survival until a safer moment. I am explaining this so that what happened next makes the contrast as clear as I can make it. 3M from where I was standing, Felix Holt watched his partner, Owen Price, take a second hit. This one was worse. Owen went down and did not immediately get back up. Felix looked at Owen on the ground. Felix looked at the direction the contact had come from. I want to be precise about what I observed next. I want to use accurate language. I have tried many translations, and none of them fully carry it. Felix made a sound, not a battle signal, not a tactical call for support, not the organized, functional vocalization that soldiers used to coordinate under fire. Something else, something that did not have a name in my translator's lexicon for combat. Communication, because it was not combat. Communication, it came from somewhere below language. It was the sound of something being torn that was not designed to be torn. And then Felix moved, not toward cover, not toward a better firing position, not toward any location that the mathematics of survival would recommend. He moved toward the thing that had put Owen on the ground, into the worst angle of the engagement, into a probability window that I calculated in the 3 seconds I watched him go at below 12%. Favorable outcome. He moved the way I have only ever seen things move when they are done doing calculations. He closed that corridor. I stood still for 1.3 seconds. In 31 campaigns, the longest I had previously been still during an active engagement was 0.4 seconds, and that was to avoid a structural collapse I had not predicted. 1.3 seconds. I watched Felix Holt do the impossible thing and come out of the other side of it and go directly back to Owen and pull him behind cover and start saying his name over and over in the low voice people use when they are trying to keep something alive through the sound of it. Alone. I stood still. I had been in 47 known species company. I had a taxonomy, I had cross-references, and updated files in 31 campaigns of data. There was no entry in any of it for what I had just watched. I kept watching the humans for the rest of the engagement. Here is what I noticed. The Thune fight harder when they are winning. The momentum of success amplifies their output. Take the advantage away and they recalibrate. calmly, professionally, efficiently. They adjust. Every species I have ever fought, alongside, adjusts. The humans did not adjust. The humans accelerated. Every setback, every loss, every moment. Where the mathematics said the numbers were going the wrong way, it produced more from them, not desperation, not the frantic output of a unit that knows it is losing, something with a different shape entirely, something that looked, from where I was standing, like the loss itself was being converted into something I do not have a word for. Fuel is the closest translation I have found. They were running on something that required damage to produce. By the time hour 6 began, the Charith formation had pushed us back to a secondary position, and the relay station was no longer a tactical objective. Staying alive was the tactical objective. Davhar called her unit together in the cover of the blown northern wall. I watched from 8 m away. She looked at each of them. Owen, who was holding himself together with a compression seal and sheer refusal. Clara, whose medic kit was nearly empty. Felix, who had ice on his face and was breathing in the shallow way that means a person is running on something other than physical reserves. Nina, who had her comms unit in pieces and was rebuilding it with her hands because it had taken a glancing strike, and she had decided it was going to work again, whether it agreed or not. Lena, who was watching Davhar with that expression I still had no translation for. Davhar looked at all of them. She said something. The translator gave me part of it. Not today. The rest was idiomatic beyond the translator's range, something at the boundary of language and something older than language. The translator offered 3 possible renderings and flagged all 3 as insufficient. She turned toward the Charith formation. There was something happening in my chest. Davhar walked toward the collapse formation. Not ran. Walked. I want to be precise about this because the distinction carries all the weight. Running is what a body does when adrenaline overrides assessment and drives the legs without consulting the rest of the organism. Running is biological. Running is the loss of choice to chemistry. She walked, which meant she had done the calculation, had looked at the probability window and gotten the same answer I got and chosen to walk toward it with her eyes open at the pace of someone who is going somewhere because they have decided to go there, not because something inside them took over and sent them. She was laughing. That is the thing I have turned over the most in the time since Yvetha 4, not the walk, not the formation ahead, the laughing, a sound that the translator as amusement, as lightness, as something produced in the absence of threat, and she was making it while walking toward the worst thing on that moon. I have sat with this for months. The closest I have come to understanding. It is this: the laughter was not the absence of fear. It was what she put in the place of fear, a decision to fill the space where the calculation was supposed to go with something that the calculation could not touch. It is the bravest thing I have ever seen, and I cannot even verify that. Bravery is the right word for it. Her unit followed her, without an order, without a signal, without a formation call or tactical command. Owen Price, 1 functional arm. Clara Webb, empty kit. Felix Holt, running on something that was no longer physical. Nina Cross, comms unit not fully rebuilt, held together in one hand. Lena Shaw, moving with that same unreadable expression, the one that I understand now was not unreadable at all but simply expressed in a frequency I had not yet learned. They all went because she went first. That was all. That was the entire logic of it. She went, so they went. I have fought beside 47 species and studied 200 years of military history across 63 documented civilizations, and I have never found another instance of that logic. The Garel follow formation. Memory, the Thune follow momentum. The Mexery follow whoever is running fastest. Every species follows something structural, something systemic, something that can be mapped and predicted and accounted for in advance. The humans followed a person, a specific, singular, irreplaceable person, because she went first. I followed. I did not know why at the time. I did not stop to examine it. I simply moved. And the movement felt less like a tactical decision and more like the only available direction. The way a river does not decide to move downhill but is simply going that way and has always been going that way. The Cora collapse formation was a distributed containment system. It was designed, I say this with full tactical respect, excellently. Every known species has a predictable maximum stress threshold, a point at which the formation has absorbed enough that the calculation tips negative and the species withdraws. The formation was built around those thresholds. It was calibrated for every documented combat species in the current galactic theater. The humans were not in its calibration table. They had not been documented at collapse formation scale engagement before Yeveth. 4. The Cora did what I had done. They assessed the humans early, placed them in a tier, and planned around what they expected from that tier. They made the same mistake. The formation began folding from the inside 40 seconds after contact, not because we had superior numbers, not because the tactics were flawless, because the Cora's containment system was built around the assumption that at some threshold of cost, any opponent will recalculate and withdraw. The humans did not recalculate. The Cora system had no response protocol for opponents who simply kept coming through the cost. It was not a gap in their planning, it was a gap in their entire model of how combat organisms behave, a gap that existed because no organism in their experience had ever filled it. No organism except this one. The formation collapsed. It collapsed the way a structure collapses when the element it was built to resist turns out to apply in a direction the design never considered. Not a dramatic failure, a quiet, fundamental one. The architecture was correct. The assumptions underneath the architecture were wrong. Everything that followed from the wrong assumptions came apart. I was standing in the aftermath when something happened in my chest. The veil cath have a cluster of cardiovascular adjacent tissue in the upper thoracic region. It has functions related to oxygen processing and thermal regulation. It does not, under any documented physiological circumstances, produce a subjective sensation. It contracted. I ran a sensor diagnostic. The diagnostic returned no anomalies. The tissue contracted again. By the silent architects. I stood in the wreckage of the Cora's formation on the ice of Yeveth 4 and ran the diagnostic a second time and got the same result and could not explain what my own body was doing. Davar was 20 m away. She was bleeding from her left arm and her right side. She had a gash across the side of her face that would leave a mark and the kind of breathing pattern. That means a person is running inventory on their own damage. She was also talking to Felix, checking each of her unit in sequence, moving from one to the next, a hand on a shoulder here, a quick assessment there, her voice low and even, and constant like she was keeping time for all of them. She looked up and found me. The smile again, the one without a tactical function, the one I still had no category for. The tissue in my chest contracted a third time. I turned away and looked at the relay station, now accessible and still intact. Beneath the southern glacier wall, that was the objective. We had the objective. The operation had succeeded. I cataloged the success. For the first time in 31 campaigns, cataloging something did not make me feel organized. It just made me feel like I was holding a container that had developed a crack I had not noticed until just now. The Veilcath grieve in designated quiet periods alone after in a specific ritual. That takes an exact amount of time and is then complete. I know this because I have used the ritual 37 times in 200 years of service. It works every time it works. You open the sealed room, you sit with what is. Inside it you perform the acknowledgement and then you close it again, and the closing is permanent. The grief is not erased, it is properly housed. It no longer moves through your days uninvited. I plan to use it for second vault. That evening, the Veilcath aboard the vessel had set up a small recovery space in the lower deck. I would go there after the medical evaluations were complete. I would open the room I had sealed on the glacier. I would say the proper words. I would close it. I did go there. The ritual did not work. I sat with it for the full designated period and the room would not close. Something was wrong with the architecture of the process. I performed each step correctly. I had performed these exact steps 37 times. I know them. The way I know the weight of my weapons. The room would not close. I sat alone in the quiet space and held the room open for twice the designated period. It still would not close. I went to the common area. The humans were there. I had not planned to go where the humans were, but the lower deck recovery space was not working and the common area was. The adjacent room and I stood in the doorway for a moment and then I stayed. What they were doing had no designation. In my tactical records, Owen was sitting with his arm in a stabilization sleeve recounting something to Felix with large specific hand gestures from his functioning arm. Whatever he was saying was making Felix produce the nose exhale sound, the amusement response repeatedly. Clara was checking a small wound on Nina's neck that Nina kept insisting did not need checking while also eating something from a container with her other hand. Lena was sitting with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, doing the controlled breathing I had noticed before the deployment, but looser now, slower, like a mechanism winding down. Davar was at the far end of the table, with her feet on the surface of it and a warm drink in both hands, looking at nothing specific. Nobody was celebrating. I want to be precise about that too. There was no victory performance, no elevated display of success. They were simply together in the same space, making sounds at each other, occupying the time between the hard Thing that had just ended and whatever. Hard thing came next. I had no framework for this as a functional activity. I stood in the doorway. Davhar looked over at me. She moved her feet off the table and tipped her head toward the empty seat across from her. I sat down. She pushed her container of warm liquid toward me. I looked at it. She pushed it a little further. I took it. I tasted it. It was terrible in ways my sensors could describe precisely, and my vocabulary was not designed to convey. I held it. She held her own drink. She was not looking at me anymore. She was looking at the space that Owen was performing his account into, and a small version of. The smile was on her face, the one she had directed at me twice, not directed at me now, just present, ambient. I sat with the terrible warm liquid and watched. Felix and Owen were reliving the moment in the subglacial corridor where Owen's suit had briefly locked into a thermal resistance mode that prevented him from bending his left knee. This had apparently led to a very specific kind of walking that Felix was now performing in the limited space between the table and the wall. Everybody who saw it produced the nose exhale sound, even Nina, who had been maintaining that she was absolutely fine and her neck did not need attention. It occurred to me, watching this, that they were processing not the Vale-Cath way, not designated quiet alone time with proper ritual structure. They were processing the engagement by returning to it together, breaking pieces of it off and examining them, making the pieces smaller through repetition and laughter and shared witness until the pieces fit somewhere that could be lived with. It was completely different from every method I knew. It was working. I watched Owen demonstrate the lock knee walk one more time for Clara, who had missed it the first time, and I watched Clara's face do the thing that human faces do when something is very funny. The way all the composed architecture of it suddenly stops being composed and just becomes the feeling, unguarded, complete. Something occurred to me that I had not thought on the glacier. On the glacier, watching them walk into the collapse formation, I had thought, what is it that you have that makes this possible? What force moves you toward that kind of cost without calculation? Sitting in the common area with a terrible warm drink, watching them be terrible and loud and physical with each other, I thought a different question. What is it that you have that makes this room possible, this room where nobody is performing and nobody is filing anything away and everybody is just here, fully here, taking up space and making sound and being witnessed? The Vale-Cath have the sealed room, the ritual, the proper housing of grief. We are very good at it. Looking around the common area, I began to wonder, and this is the crack I mentioned, the one in the container, whether proper housing was the same thing as living with, whether the room being sealed was the same thing as the room being handled. I had sealed 60 years of second Val in a room on a glacier at hour 4 of a combat engagement, and the room would not close now because something in the operation of the closing mechanism had been. I searched for the word disrupted. By what? By watching Owen Price walk into a 12% probability window for a person he cared about. By watching Davhar laugh at the thing ahead of her. By watching Felix say Owen's name over and over in the low voice people use when they are trying to keep alive through sound alone. By a smile with no tactical function. by a push of a warm drink across a table, by the question that had been sitting uncatalogued since the briefing room, since Lena Shaw looked at me and I looked away and looked back, and she was already talking to someone else. What is the name of the thing that makes all of this possible? What is the name of the thing I felt in my chest on the glacier? What is the name of the thing that makes the Vale-Cath method feel for the first time in 200 years like a solution to a problem rather than the only way to be? I did not ask these questions out loud. I sat with them in the common area and drank the terrible liquid and watched Felix discover that his lock knee impression was slightly more accurate if he held his arms out to the sides, and watched Owen tell him that that was not accurate at all, but keep going. Davor was watching me, not directly, in the sideways manner that humans use when they are observing something and do not want the thing to know it is being observed. I have very good lateral sensors. I knew she was watching. I did not let on that I knew. She finished her drink, she stood up, stretched a full body extension that the translator marked as physical decompression behavior, and said something to her unit collectively that appeared to be both a good night and a directive and a small joke, because it produced the nose exhale from several of them simultaneously. She walked past me on the way to the door. She put her hand on my shoulder for 1 second. Just 1 second. She did not say anything. She went through the door. The tissue in my chest did the contraction thing. I looked at my own thoracic sensor readout. I ran the diagnostic a third time. No anomalies, no malfunction, no physiological explanation. I sat in the common area for another hour after everyone else had gone. The thing in my chest kept doing what it was doing. I had a word for it now. I did not want the word to be right. It was right. I had read about it. Every xenobiological study of human psychology discusses it. Every profile of every human commander includes it as a primary variable. Every military liaison briefing lists it as the most significant unknown factor in human combat behavior. I had read about it the way you read about a weather system in a region you have never visited. I had been in the weather now. I understood in the common area of a joint command vessel orbiting an ice moon that had nearly ended all of us, that the Vale-Cath are a species that is very good at many things and genuinely excellent at the sealed room and the ritual and the proper housing of every difficult thing, and that there was a version of being alive that my species had never fully accessed. I had been afraid to know that. That was the fear. Not the Korith. Not the collapse formation. Not death. This. The knowledge landing without warning. That the thing I had been doing for 200 years, the filing, the cataloging, the cold mathematics of survival, was not the only way, and possibly not even the best way, and that somewhere in the gap between my way and Davor's laugh on the glacier was the entire shape of what I had been missing. The wall would not close. For the first time in 31 campaigns, I let it stay open. The official after-action report for the Yeveth 4 engagement is 17 pages. I wrote it in 3 hours. It is accurate. Every tactical data point is correct. The Korith formation analysis is, I have been told, the most thorough submitted for any engagement in this sector. The commendation recommendations are specific, evidence-based, and calibrated appropriately to the actions observed. I have written 43 of these reports in my career. This one required 17 revisions. Not because the tactical data was difficult, because there is another document, the one I wrote simultaneously, in the space underneath the official language, the one that will never be transmitted and has no designated format in Volkith reporting structure, because there is no Volkith category for what it contains. I am setting down both the official language first, then what was underneath it. Yevith 4 Joint Engagement Assessment, submitted by Field Commander of Volkith Division, 3rd Rotation. The operation achieved its primary objective. The relay station was secured and returned to functional status within tolerances. Korath swarm engagement resulted in full formation collapse. Combined unit losses were within projected parameters for this engagement. Glass. Within projected parameters, Sekhit T. Val is in that phrase, he is in the phrase the same way he is in the sealed room that will not close, precise. Accounted for, somewhere that looks organized from the outside. I kept the phrase human allied unit performed with operational effectiveness exceeding their Tier 4 classification in multiple documented engagement windows. Recommend reclassification review. Exceeded Tier 4, this is what the official language produces, exceeded as if what Davar did on that glacier is a matter of degree, as if the gap between Tier 4 and whatever tier she occupies is a distance that can be measured with the instruments I have. I kept the phrase anyway, it is the best the reporting structure will allow. Unit integration presented no tactical complications. Human commander demonstrated strong situational adaptation and unit cohesion. Maintenance under adverse contact. Commendation for Sergeant Priya Davar. Recommended at full citation level. Strong situational adaptation. I read that line and I think of her walking. Not running, walking. With her feet on the same ice I was standing on and her eyes on the same thing mine were on, and the laughter in her throat like a door she held open on purpose so the cold could not get in. No report language reaches that. I kept the phrase. Field recommendation, continued. Integration of human units in combined operations, joint training exercises. Advised to improve cross-species. Tactical communication and formation. Coordination. This is where the document and the document underneath it differ completely. The document underneath it says, I have put in a reassignment request, transfer out of the Joint Human Division. Administrative reallocation of resources. The official reason reads, my commanding officer approved it. Within a standard day, he did not ask questions. The Veilcath do not ask those kinds of questions. We respect the operational judgment of our field officers, and we do not examine the personal logic underneath administrative decisions. The reassignment request was honest. The reason I gave was not. The reason I gave was tactical. The real reason is in this document, the one that will not be filed anywhere. The one I am writing in the language I use when I am not writing for anyone else. The real reason is this. Every time I stand next to the human unit, I feel something that has no veil. Cath designation, the chest contraction. The unclosing room, the question. Underneath the question, underneath the question. The one that goes all the way, down to the foundation of how I have been alive for 200 years and asks whether the foundation is what I thought it was. I cannot fight next to them because every time I do, I understand something new about the thing I have been missing. And understanding it hurts. Not the way a wound hurts, the way a long-held belief hurts when evidence accumulates against it past the point where the belief can be maintained. The way a sealed room hurts when you go back to close it and realize you have been confusing sealed with resolved this whole time. That is the real reason. The transfer is approved. I am assigned to a Volkrath operational division on the far end of this sector. Good fighters, reliable, efficient, cold mathematics and proper ritual in sealed rooms that close correctly every time. I know what I am going back to. I know what I am going away from. The commendation report for the human unit is the most detailed I have ever written. I want the record to be exact. I want anyone who reads it to understand within the limits of official language what I observed on that moon. I want the taxonomy corrected. They are not tier 4. They are not tier 4 in the way that a star is not a candle. The category exists. The category is simply not the right size. Owen Price, who took 2 direct hits and used his remaining functional arm to pull his partner behind cover and then looked at the direction of the second contact with an expression that had no fear in it whatsoever, only a kind of focused intention that I have been trying to find a Volkrath word for. Since that day, the closest I have found is the word we use for the state of a river in flood. Not angry, not even fast by choice. Simply full beyond its design capacity, and therefore moving at the only rate available to it. He is cited at the highest unit commendation level available for combined operations. Clara Webb, who crossed open ground under active contact to reach a Volkrath soldier she had never worked with before, whose kit was insufficient for the damage present, who improvised 3 separate field stabilizations with equipment not designed for, who, when I ran the probability on that corridor crossing after the fact, got a number I am not going to put in this document because it would not be believed. She is cited at the highest level. Felix Holt, who is 22 years old, which is almost not years at all, and who on the ice of Yevith 4 went into a 12% probability window for a person he loved, and I am using that word love in an official combat commendation because it is the accurate word for what I observed, and accuracy is the only standard I have, and who came out the other side of it and went directly back to that person and said their name repeatedly in the low voice people use when they are trying to hold a living thing in place through sound alone. I sat with Felix's commendation for a long time before I could write it, without the chest contraction interfering with the sensor calibration. I wrote it anyway. Nina Cross, who rebuilt a comms unit by hand under fire and restored communication to the full formation at the exact moment the Korath rear positions began their secondary advance, and we needed the formation intact, and she made it intact with her 2 hands, and whatever is inside a human being that decides the work will be done and does it. Lena Shaw, who carried 2 injured unit members across 40 m of open glacier to the extraction point after the formation collapsed, who I saw look back twice at the position she had just come from and Each time make the decision to go back. Again. Who on the third trip had a visible physical deficit that she was overriding through whatever mechanisms humans use to override those things, which as far as I can determine is simply deciding to. All five cited at the highest level. Sergeant Priya Davar. I have started this commendation 7 times. Each time I get to the part where I am supposed to describe the specific action being commended, I write a phrase and then I delete it, and then I write another one, and then I delete that too. Because the official language keeps arriving at the edge of what happened and stopping there, unable to go further. Let me try once more. At hour 6 of the Yevith 4 engagement, with the combined unit in a secondary defensive position and the primary tactical objective no longer accessible, and the probability of successful extraction declining, Sergeant Davar assessed the situation and made a command decision. That is accurate. That is the official version. That is the version that will go into the permanent record and be read by evaluating officers and cited future joint operations planning documents. Here is the rest of it. Here is the part that will not go into any permanent record. She knew what the calculation said. I know she knew because she is not someone who does not run calculations. She runs them faster and more accurately than most officers I have encountered in 31 campaigns. She had all the same data I had. She got the same answer. She decided the answer was not what mattered. Not because she was not afraid. I am not going to write that she was not afraid, because I do not know that, and I think it would diminish what she actually did. The not afraid version of that walk is just an organism with a deficiency going toward a threat because it cannot do otherwise. That is not what I saw. What I saw was someone who may had everything that makes that walk terrible, and went anyway. Walked at the pace of a decision, not a compulsion. Laughed because she chose to put something in the space where the weight of the calculation was supposed to sit, and she chose laughter, and the choice held, and everyone followed her because she went first, and I followed her because I had run out of reasons not to, and on the other side of it, bleeding from 3 places with ice in her hair. She looked at me and smiled, the smile with no tactical function, the one I've been trying to file for months. I know what the file is now. I know what category it belongs in. The humans have had the category for a very long time, and they have many words for it, and they use those words without any apparent concern for how much they are admitting when they do. The Vale Cath have the sealed room. I am beginning to understand what it costs us that we do not have the other thing. Sergeant Davar is cited at the highest commendation level available in the Combined Operations Framework. The commendation text specifies tactical leadership under adverse conditions, formation preservation through personal command initiative and engagement, outcome reversal through direct action. It does not say what I am saying here. Nothing in the official record says what I am saying here. That is why I am saying it somewhere. The reassignment is approved. I leave in 3 days. The new division is competent, and the work is real, and I will do my job at the standard I have always held. I will not think about the common area. I will not think about the terrible warm drink. I will not think about the hand on my shoulder for 1 second in a doorway. I told myself I would not do these things. I know already that I will do all of them. My commanding officer, reviewing the transfer request, made one comment, not an objection, not a question. He simply noted that in his experience, an officer who transfers away from an assignment after writing the most thorough commendation of the career for the unit they are leaving usually transfers back. I told him the tactical reallocation was the correct decision. He said he was certain it was. He looked at me the way Valkith look at each other when both parties are being precise and neither party is being complete. I did not revise my request. 11 months later, I will revise my request. I do not know that yet. I am writing this 3 days before the transfer, and I do not know what 11 months from now looks like. I know only what I know now, which is more than I knew on Yeveth 4 and less than I will know eventually, and exactly as complicated as learning always is. Here is what I know. I know that the Valkith are not a fearful species. That is accurate. We do not experience fear in the standard physiological configuration. We snorts do not have the response. We are not brave because bravery requires the alternative, and we do not have the alternative. I know that on Yeveth 4 something happened in my chest that the diagnostic would not explain. I know that the sealed room is still open. I know that Davar walked toward the unsurvivable thing at the pace of a decision and laughed, and everyone followed her, and they should not have survived, and they did. I know that I followed. I know that the word for what moved me is not a Vol Krath word. The humans have many words for it. They use those words without hesitation, out loud in common areas, over terrible warm drinks, in the voice people use when they are not protecting themselves from what they mean. The Vol Krath do not have those words. I thought for 200 years that we did not need them. I filed that belief on the ice of Yeveth, for alongside every other thing I thought I knew about soft, fragile, impossible humans and their impossible way of being alive. The file would not close. The request was approved. I did not feel relieved. I did not know then what I know now, which is that I would put in for reinstatement 11 months later, and that my commanding officer would approve it without a single question and look at me with the expression he had worn when I filed the original transfer, precise and incomplete, and that I would stand in the briefing room of a joint command vessel and see Priya Davar across the tactical display, eating something from a silver packet and arguing with someone she outranked, and I would feel the chest contraction, and I would not run a diagnostic. I would already know what it was. I had been afraid to know. I know now. The humans have a word for it. They have so many words for it. I am going to learn them all.